time ago, and we sent in Pam Abdi and Mike DeLuca, who sort of handheld until the archive stepped in and said, we'd love to host this. And so everyone over there, I definitely want to thank for that, and all of you being here, because I really did want to show this. I made the film 30 years ago and updated it in the last year into high definition, got all new material, made some changes, a new soundtrack, and had some things, and lots of additions visually. And I really wanted to put it into a new age for a new audience to kind of capture, you know, this past time. I mean, I originally made it to sort of preserve the house when my grandmother died, and then it became a larger project. And after 30 years, looking back at this film, it's tough to make a guy like this sympathetic. Looking at it 30 years later. But I did want people to kind of know about the history of this company and the movie business a little bit in general, and so you understand. You may not always have to like or certainly not approve, but sort of see what kind of guy that ran that kind of company at that time. And so sharing it with you has really been one of my top priorities, because you know, you're in the thick of it, you know, and it's a company that matters to all of you, I'm sure. So it's a pleasure, and I'm really grateful to be here.
Before we go to Q&A, I have some questions as well and some topics to bring up that I think are of interest. One thing that sorry, I forget my cheat sheet. I've never really done anything like this before, so apologies. Well, I think just from you said you wanted to make this. Did it come to you when the mansion had been after your grandmother passed away and it was being sold?
It's happening very fast. My aunt, Barbara, Jack's daughter, Barbara Warner, took care of the sale, and David Geffen expressed interest, and it happened very fast. So I ran out there with a friend of mine, Don, who later became the editor of this film, and we just shot some stuff just to preserve. We didn't know what to do with it, and that's what you see here, just some of those really, their whole movie quality. And so that got incorporated and became a larger project to, you know, I mean, reflecting back on this, all this great material. I mean, I'm so lucky as a filmmaker to have, I have all this Warner Brothers material to work with. I mean, who would say that, you know? You have film clips and historical footage and all that great photos that come from various sources, including Warner Brothers archives. So, yeah, it became a larger and larger project. It was my first documentary. So I've learned some things since then, and it was important to go back into it last year to, you know, do really the director's cut. And it never showed in the US. I have to say, this film, as you see here, the feature-length version never showed. There was a cut-down version that Warner Brothers licensed for a home video release in Casablanca, I think in 2008. So they only had a short version of it. And it was sold around the world. So it did get good coverage in everywhere but the United States. So really, this is, for US audiences, it's really the first time seeing it.
It's great to see it on the screen. I've obviously never seen it on the screen before, so
yeah.
It makes an impression. One thing I want to mention about one thing I want to say about when you mentioned the auction sale of the mansion, you said everything was sold at auction. I want to say not quite everything. Thankfully, the founder of the corporate archive was Leith Adams, the great Leith Adams, who always celebrated. He actually went to the mansion thanks to, it was David Geffen who invited him, yes. This is about 92?
1990. Well,
was it
1990, my grandmother died, so shortly.
It was 1990, okay. And was able to purchase a lot of the material back, especially the material that was in the Warner Mansion, a lot of the stuff that's in the lobby right now. All the bound scripts, which we have just about, I think 500 or 600, I forget mixed up, but a lot of scripts. And a lot of the personal effects you see out there thankfully came from the mansion, so at least those didn't get sold at auction. Another thing, as someone who's been here a long time, and a lot of our fellow employees would like to hear who have been around the lot, what I'm curious about is what memories do you have of being on the lot, when your grandfather was here, any sets you visited, any post-production things, anything that stands out, because, to see something being filmed, or to have seen something, I was on the set of perfect storm, and that was a pretty special, memory, just in terms of the scope of it. So I think you can outdo that. What were you on the set of, on What Did You Witness?
One of the early films I loved was The Music Man. But later I got to go to the set of Camelot, My Fair Lady, The Great Race, during the big New York race, start of the race set, so all those cars and extras, that was spectacular. It was a treat to come here. My father was doing television, so I did get to see TV shows being filmed. I wasn't allowed to stay up late to watch them though. So actually as a kid, I never saw Warner Brothers TV shows growing up. I had to see them later. But it was a pleasure to come to the lot. It was, you know, as you know, it's a magical place. And for a kid, it really is this, you know, the back lot and everything was an adventure land. And I couldn't come too often. My father did want to keep the kids away from becoming complete Hollywood brats, I guess. So there's some limits on that. And he'd certainly have to call and make arrangements. But it was just a and it was a very neat lot too. I got to walk around. It's back to being pretty pristine. And I know my grandfather was a stickler. He even says in his autobiography, he's kind of a neatnik. You know, he has always folds his pants and puts them up and cleans up. He hates a lot being messy at all, any cars or garbage or anything. So he wanted a pristine looking lot. And I have to say, it was a very special place and clean and great. There's also sometimes not enough production to make it dirty, you know. But so I sort of came during that transition period in the early mid '60s, late '60s, before it got turned over to eventually, you know, Kinney and Seven Arts, right? And my father was in the TV building, which I guess is over there. I don't know what it's called now.
Right.
That was built especially for television. My father's stories about television are great too, because he got into that department with about 6 weeks to go before they were supposed to be on the air, and they didn't have any scripts. They had sold Warner Brothers Presents to ABC, this rotating set of 3 shows, Cheyenne, Kings Row, and Casablanca would rotate each week, and there'd be about 10 minutes set aside to advertise Warner Brothers movies. I think that's why Warner Brothers wanted to do it. They got 10 minutes of free TV advertising on ABC. And when my father came in, the scripts, there were no scripts, and they were supposed to be on the air in 6 or 8 weeks. So he went down to a local library, and bookstore rather, and just bought a bunch of paperback westerns and thrillers and things, and just handed them out to writers. He said, adapt season 1, and you know, they worked 6 days a week then. It was a shorter Saturday, but you worked on Saturday. And they made the shows in 6 days. I think the budgets were about $50,000 for an hour show, $50,000 to $60,000. So that's not, you know. But yeah, they had 9 shows on a week, and it did save the company in terms of keeping production going, as the documentary says. So that's what I sort of knew more about at that time.
Right. And speaking of your father, what's interesting is when the part of the documentary comes up where he was basically fired by your grandfather, I kind of heard like small gasps throughout the audience, because it seems pretty cold-hearted. But you told me actually that they did reconcile eventually, right?
They did about my grandfather just escaped to Palm Springs. I met David Zasloff just before this, and went up to the office, and he has Jack Warner's desk. And I said, oh, that's the desk that Jack would hide behind after he fired you. So he was a bit of a coward about that. He ran off to Palm Springs and didn't confront my father. My father was shocked, and also working with my father was his assistant, and who came in, and was Hugh Benson, and Hugh's son is actually here. Jeffrey is here back there, and he said, "We're out." And my father said, "What do you mean we're out?" He said, "I just heard we're gone, we're fired." And a year later in Palm Springs, my father was walking along somewhere, and Jack pulls up in his car and says, "You want to ride?" And they hadn't talked to each other in a year, and they sort of whatever. They never spoke about it. I think Jack didn't. I mean, just the insight into him, because I've seen people play him in movies and TV shows and so forth, and they've done a good job in the Feud series. That what's his name? The actor was very Jack Warner, but Jack had trouble looking at you in the eye. He kind of, as secure as he seemed, I think he was, in terms of other people's energy, he could be a bit afraid, cowardly, duck around with jokes and things like that. And so he hated the confrontation, actually. He could stand up for certain things, but he hated certain kinds of confrontation. And yeah, he just cowardly escape. But they did make up, and you know, I saw my grandfather too during that time, so yeah, my father was pretty easygoing, so he was happy to have the relationship.
And one thing always strikes me too is, how cool is it, you say, yeah, my mom was in Casablanca.
Oh yeah, that.
Sure.
The story of my mother in Casablanca, she was just out of Beverly Hills High School, and she was taking acting classes from Sophie Rosenstein, who was the acting coach here at Warner Brothers. And she had my mother had read the script of Casablanca at home, because Jack would bring home scripts, and he'd read it, and she told me, I didn't think it was very good. It was kind of corny and old-fashioned script. And she said, later when I heard Ingrid Bergman was going to be in it, and I said, oh, she brings a lot of class, so maybe it'll be a better movie than what I think reading the script. But while she's taking acting classes, Sophie Rosenstein says, here, read this part. And she reads it. She said, that's very good. And this is something my mother did not pursue. She was surprised as anybody. And then a casting director came in, read for her, and then Michael Curtiz came in, and she read for him, and someone finally said, I think she could do this part. But who's going to ask Jack if she could do it? My mother said, I'm not asking him, because he didn't want any family members to be actors. So someone asked, and Jack said, okay, she can do the part of Anna Brendel, the woman from Bulgaria. She can do the part, but we're not giving her a contract. So she did that part, and she came back later to do some Warner Brothers television. She did some films, MGM, and some other places. But she, for her first film, and it's, you know, talk about luck of the draw. And so she acted for a while until I was maybe a couple years old, 2 or 3 years old, as she retired.
Good.
There were a couple of notes I had. I mean, I definitely want to hear questions from people. I know we're going to open it up to that. But there was a quote or two from his book. You know, I guess we get the impression that he had this hardscrabble background with all the brothers, and he does say here, I guess I started out as a fuss budget. Anyone who knows my habits around the studio will probably say I am even worse now. I still turn out lights, empty ashtrays, put shoe trees in my shoes, carefully put my clothes on hangers, and cling to similar habits. He hated disorder. He'd go around at home at night, killing snails on the property.
Did you witness that?
He told me, and yeah, I got some snails, you know. So escargot, no. He has some interesting things to say about sort of the industry itself. He says about beating a formula to death. One of the weaknesses of our industry, I think, is that all the studios tend to squeeze every last penny from the public when a star or a subject clicks. This chain is inevitably stretched so thin that the sublime becomes ridiculous, such as the Frankenstein series, which began with a classic and ended with Abbott Costello. And finally, just let me say, he had nicknames. He's just a creative guy. He loved show business. He was a showbiz guy, and he happened to be in this particular job. But he always gave people nicknames. He called John Barrymore the thirsty profile. John did drink a lot, didn't he? James Cagney was the professional againster. He was always fighting about something. Rin Tin Tin was the mortgage lifter. Gordon McRae, who's in this, just called him Shoulders. That was Gordon's name. Errol Flynn was the Baron. Of course, Darrell Francis Zanuck was called Three Charming Fellows. But anyway, yeah, I mean, I want to hear people's thoughts on this, and be as blunt as you want on your thoughts, because I have a variety of feelings, but I felt very lucky to have been able to make this film and explore his life and see it as an adult, not just my memories as a young person. Leave it at that. But you want to open this up?
Yeah, shall we, if we have any